It says it's now streaming live on Facebook.
It's now streaming live on Facebook. It's always fun to figure that out. Okay, so here we are. So we are live on Thoughtful Tuesdays. This is Lori Lauritsen with LO Counseling and Wellness. As promised, I'm here interviewing a good friend and colleague of mine on his recovery journey. So I posted a while back that I wanted to hear some stories of recovery just to share with you guys and have different perspectives. So Will and I are winging this because that's what we do. You'll have to bear with us. You get a very real experience here because if I, tried to do all the editing and all that stuff, I probably just wouldn't post it. So I want to make sure that you guys actually get the information and get to hear, from someone who's been through the trenches and just different perspectives than just hearing me all the time. So, and Will and I definitely have very close opinions and then very different opinions. So it'll be really fun. So again, this is Will Atkinson, good friend and colleague of mine, and he does so many wonderful things. So I'm going to let you share a little bit about yourself, and then I will ask some questions. And then, of course, as we've talked about, we're very, ebb and flow. So if you have any thoughts, comments that aren't questions that I ask, please feel free.
Thank you, Lori. And it's an absolute honor to be able to sit down and talk to you about my recovery and your audience. Hi, my name is William Atkinson. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that I haven't picked up a drink or a drug since February 27th of 2006. My story is kind of a cliche. I got in trouble young and became mentally unstable to the point where I wanted to harm myself, and had an amazing psychiatrist who said, Will, I've seen you a bunch of times, we can lock you up, but why don't we talk about substance abuse treatment? And I was like so offended by this concept. How could we need to talk about substance abuse treatment? He said, well, either you're mentally insane or you have a substance abuse problem because, Will, I've never seen you sober. So, I was like, all right, maybe that's a good idea. So they gave me a pamphlet for a spa. I got the opportunity to go to Hazelden's 28-day program in Minnesota, and my cliche journey is that I eventually moved down here to Florida. Started working as a treatment center as a behavioral health tech, and got an education through Springfield College Human Services, and eventually opened up my own business, helping addicts and alcoholics. And we've been going for almost a decade now. So I'm love what I get the opportunity to do on a daily basis. Love that I've been able to maintain my sobriety one day at a time, and happy and excited to share with you all any thoughts, opinions, personal experiences that I might have. So thank you for the introduction, Lori, and allowing me to introduce myself too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And, I love doing stuff like this because I'm sure I'm going to learn things about you that I didn't know. Will and I met, what has it been, like 7, 8 years ago now?
Probably. A long time. Yeah.
Long time. Yeah. And, we've worked together in different capacities, and I always just respected not only your story, but just your tenacity for helping other addicts and alcoholics in recovery or get to that place, and I love being able to share that. And, this month is recovery month. So that's part of the reason that I wanted to do this. And the theme for this year, I'm sure you know this, is, support. Like, the visual is like a braid, right? So that you can't do it yourself. So having that support. And I think sometimes, people don't get to see that long-term, even I don't always see that, because I trust, after a certain period of time, my clients leave me, and I don't even know if they stay sober. I have to pray and hope for that and things like that. Sometimes I get wonderful stories where they reach back out to me and share that they've been sober for however many years. But a lot of times we don't get to see that. And there's so much emphasis on treatment and people, relapsing over and over again and different things like that. So I wanted to have this conversation, for several reasons, to look at the supportive aspect, like who were the support people in your recovery, right? What those steps look like. And then, of course, as I go along, I'll think of other questions to ask because there's so many. It makes me so excited. So you may have to stop me at some point.
and I love that you're on this track because, we do hyper focus on stabilization. And for good reason. I mean, like people who aren't doing well, it's pretty obvious. So let's get them help as quickly as we can, but then we kind of forget about them. I mean, it's the ending of that service agreement. So if
Right.
somebody goes through detox, they're only there till their insurance or their private pay allows. Somebody goes through treatment, it's generally, 28 days, might be a couple of months, but it has an end date as well. I run a SPAR accredited sober living facility. It has an end date when people say there's an end date, when they're ready to. So it's all of these things have the ending of a service agreement. What becomes supportive is the outside of the substance abuse field support programs that exist. And there are a bunch of people that I can individually name who have been there for me in times where I haven't always felt my best. Yourself included, Lori. Like there are numerous people to thank for that, and there's even in one of the models for recovery, there's a famous, trying not to breach any type of traditions, but I'll just screw it. In the 12-step model, Dr. Bob's farewell address talks about 1,000 things that need to go right just for us to all get the opportunity to sit there and be sober that one day. And we in the professional field are trying to find a way to manufacture essentially what happens organically for some. And we kind of get down on ourselves for this overarching 5% survivability rate, which we're all aware of and we all want to see improve, and at the same time aren't always aware of what that is going to be. So there is an element of which is not applicable or happy for us scientific folks, but there is an element of credit being due to something potentially greater than ourselves that can't necessarily be quantified for those of us like myself who have gotten the opportunity to stay sober long term. So I need a more specific question. What would you like? Because I have great ideas of what I'd love to see.
Right? No, and absolutely. I'll let you go. I'll interrupt you if I need to, but that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I talk about is, there's not one right path for everyone, but your path is your path. So, of course, respecting traditions, sharing your story in any way that you feel comfortable with is important. But, one of the things that I talk about is my model, which is the biopsychosocial spiritual model, right? Which means we have to address all parts of ourselves, the biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual, because that's who we are as human beings. That's how we treat ourselves holistically. So using those terms, God, universe, higher power, is not necessarily, in the treatment field, it's usually people are pretty open about it anyway, but especially here, as a holistic therapist, like I want to address all of those things, whatever that looks like for you, right? So that is an important aspect, and it is hard that we can't quantify, although, they always try. There's this wonderful book about, Buddha's brain and how scientifically why he was happy and all of these kinds of things. So we always try and look for that. And there's a lot of scientific backing behind the 12-step program, right? We now know that 90 meetings in 90 days fits with the, it takes about 90 days of treatment, regardless of what kind of treatment it is, for the brain to do a significant amount of healing. Yeah. So absolutely, they definitely mesh together. And that's always the fun conversations that you and I have, for sure. I think one of the specific questions I want to ask you is, you don't necessarily have to name people, or you can share as much or as little as you want, but I'd love to hear what kind of support you had along your journey. I know you talked about going to Hazelden, which is a wonderful, amazing program. There's lots of wonderful programs out there. And then kind of your journey through that process. And you have a really great, story about that completely supportive model, which we don't always see here in Florida. But I would just love to hear what your personal, what went well for you, what didn't, as far as support goes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm grateful for that question. Actually, it's despite myself, it went really well. I had a really great counselor. His name was Mr. Marzak, and he had about 12 years of sobriety when he was our counselor, and he made no bones about sharing his own personal experience of, hey man, I've sat right where you guys have sat, and that helped me listen to him a little bit more. I was grateful for that. It's not a requirement, but it certainly, as the 19-year-old kid, I was like, oh, okay, that made me kind of perk up a little bit because here was a guy who could come in a suit and talk intelligently and share things with me that I didn't understand. Who was like, yeah, no, I used to smoke crack behind a dumpster. Oh, okay, like that's interesting, and he tricked me. He wanted me to go to a halfway house called Fellowship Club in St. Paul, Minnesota after treatment. And I was, no. They told me 28 days. I'm going to go home. And eventually I it was kind of like a workaround where they had this holiday event going. I think it was Thanksgiving. And I needed to go home to clean out my apartment. And the only way the counselor would let me go is if I agreed to go to Fellowship Club. Well, I had no intention of going to Fellowship Club. I just want to make that very clear. But it was exactly what I needed because I went home. Took me about 3 days to find somebody to get high with, and I got high. Most of my friends were like, "No, Will, we don't want to party with you. You just got out of treatment. You're crazy, man." And but eventually we all run into somebody, and so I showed back up to Fellowship Club on day one of sobriety. And that very first day, Fellowship Club made me go to a 12-step meeting in the local area, a group called the West End Group. And I went up there and thought that pathway wasn't going to work for me. And so I cussed out the entire group and told them how full of shit I thought they were. Excuse my language. And they didn't stop me. They just let me rant, and when I'd worn myself out, they just said, "Keep coming back. You're in the right place." And then they went on with their meeting, and that saved my life because if I'd been thrown out of whatever pathway I'd chosen or been required to go to, that would have been all the justification I needed to just go ahead and continue to self-sabotage and hurt myself. I did maintain abstinence simply because I was underage at the time for about a little over a year. But when I turned 21, I needed to test the waters again. And like most stories, it starts with a girl. I was trying to get laid, and she had some dry goods on her, and I decided that was something. I was all better now. I was 21, and this was obviously a fluke. All of the stuff the people in the 12-step rooms were telling me couldn't apply to me. It only applies to other people because I'm terminally unique. And if you can relate to that, then we can certainly be friends. And through that experience, I learned that it doesn't matter what the substance is. No matter what the mind-altering substance is, I will use it addictively. And all of the feelings, all of the negativity, all of the self-sabotage, all of the desire to self-harm, all of the just general malcontentness with life will return. And it did for me like that. So I finally understood that for me, what they were talking about in the 12 steps was accurate. May not be accurate for everyone. There are multiple pathways to recovery, but for me, the minute that any type of mind-altering substance enters my body, it's off to the races. And to be fair, there have been some women and some other they're mind-altering substances too. So, I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which I can get off the beam and not be practicing that position of balance and neutrality and just being at peace with myself. What were you going to ask?
No, I was going to say, appreciate you saying that. Couple things. So when you were at what was it called? Fellowship Club?
Yep. In St. Paul, Minnesota.
That was the halfway house, right?
Yes.
Okay. That was your first AA meeting at that?
Yeah, that wasn't in a controlled setting. So they brought in people to the treatment center that they told their story, but never really been into an outside 12-step meeting before that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I love what you said about, having to test the waters again. I mean, everything that you're saying so far is, everything that we hear on a daily basis, right? It's like, if I had a quarter for every time I heard every part of what you just shared, I would be a rich woman.
we like to say when somebody relapsed or whatever, it's like, all right, what was their name? Like what was his or her name? So it's a good joke.
Absolutely. And I also, of course, always appreciate your realness. You know what I mean? It's just real. And I appreciate you being able to share that, because that's one of the things that I pride myself on as a therapist too, is just being real, being upfront. I will, you'll catch me cursing in a group or something like that. It happens from time to time. And it's important because, I think it's important to be who we really are. And I think that's really important in recovery too, is recognizing that you're still who you are. You just make a lot of awesome changes. I always say the blessing and the curse about being in recovery is like, speaking of which, you have to deal with your shit, but you also get to deal with your shit and be a much better person on the other side.
Yes, ma'am. I completely agree. Like, to me, the definition of recovery is the ability to learn from our behavior, improve our behavior, and maintain either some form of abstinence or reduced use. So this whole idea of recovery is to thine own self be true. And at the same time is based on improvement of character, improvement of circumstance, improvement of the consequences that happen in our life.
And so, boy, isn't that like a normal person? Like, don't we all have to do that?
Yes, it is. So the idea of addictions being these like morally bad issues, like, you just didn't go to church enough on Sunday, and obviously Satan is a part of you, is kind of this antiquated approach to addictions. There's nothing morally disruptive about a addict and alcoholic who is lying, cheating, stealing. This is their survival technique. So yes, it pisses us off. Yes, it's disruptive to us, but it isn't this like, morally bankrupt. Even though we feel morally bankrupt, it just doesn't mean they're a bad person.
Right.
What it means is that they're incredibly sick. And once they've been stabilized, this is where that treatment part is important. How do we provide the support that continually pushes them and or guides them? We don't react well to being pushed, just so you know. Addicts and alcoholics, we might even agree with you, but if you tell us to do it, we'll, tell you where to head.
Yeah, right. Or you'll say, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to do that, and then that does not happen.
Yeah, so pushing is probably a bad analogy, but, the idea of how can we effectively guide someone towards making the right choices for themselves so that they no longer have to be in a situation where they're willing to wait for you to fall asleep so they can break into your garage and steal your power tools from them just so that they can get a gram of dope. Like that's it's a very normal circumstance where, how did you end up here this time? Well, funny story.
Yeah. Yes, and we could go off on that forever. So we may have to do our own show here, Will, because I think we can have some fun conversations. But to go back a little bit to how you got there and the support piece, because that's one of the big things I want to make sure we gather here is that, so for you, one of the biggest supports was that stabilization, right? Going to treatment and kind of getting your head clear enough so that you could, how I term it, do the work to stay sober, to be in recovery. And I love how you described recovery. That's really awesome, because it doesn't look the same for everybody.
It doesn't.
It really doesn't. And we've got older, ways of looking at it and newer ways of looking at it. And really what it comes down to is, how do we save your life and make it better?
Exactly. And in this day and age, it really isn't even about whether you drink or use or not. It's about whether you're going to live or die. I mean, they're putting so much fentanyl into so many things that people who aren't intending to die are dying by the hundreds, thousands.
Absolutely. So for you, it was the treatment, stabilization, and then having that continued support afterwards, which for you was, and you've mentioned this to me before, not here, but like you had that whole community. So it wasn't just that you were in sober living, you were going to 12-step, and you had that whole supportive community around you. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that was like for you, which may not be the same as what someone might experience here.
So when I was in active addiction, my world was very small. And if you can relate to that, like I remember going back to my old stomping grounds, and what was a big adventure for the day was like 2 blocks. Going from like the crack house to the dope dealer. You know what I mean? Like that was a big spot. And going to treatment and then to the fellowship club, my world was still small at first. Like I was kind of the grumpy kid walking around the place with headphones on and a sweatshirt. You know what I mean? Like just annoyed at the world, and didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be around any of these people. And so they eventually kicked me out. Like in my first halfway house, I only made it there for 3 months, but after the 3rd month, I remember, and I don't remember the woman's name, but she was incredibly caring and nice. And she was banging on my room door at noon. Will, you better not be sleeping in there. You know what I mean? Like, you need to be working, out doing a job, doing the requirements. And they did the right thing by me by kicking me out, by holding me accountable to their guidelines. And I remember I tried to call my parents to save me, and they were like, nope. and
3 months is a long time to last at 19, though. That's pretty good.
I was underage and didn't know any drug dealers. That's all. Don't get me wrong. Like getting out of my stomping grounds. I'm originally from Virginia. Going to Minnesota, that was incredibly helpful to me. But by failing out of the fellowship club, by getting kicked out, by being held accountable to their guidelines, my world got bigger. All of a sudden, I was exposed to this larger recovery community that surrounded the fellowship club, where there were upwards of 25 to 30 sober homes within a 7-block radius, where literally you couldn't walk down the street without bumping into somebody at the local coffee shop, Rudy's, or on your way to the West End, or there was like this Subs joint that made great Philly style steak and cheeses. I can't remember the name of it.
Well, that's kind of similar to, South Florida, or even, where you are there in Clearwater, St. Pete. There's a good, and you're of course creating that, and you've been creating, like I've seen that grow, having that. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, that's what we're trying to recreate. Because I was surprised when I moved down here that not everywhere had this larger, what I like to call sober bubble. And what made it so special, and something I think Florida should really consider, not that they pay attention to me, but what made it work up in Minnesota was something called Rule 25, where if somebody was in a relapse mode, in a return to active addiction, they could get state support immediately to get detox. That stabilization piece was built into the idea of their entire medical substance abuse infrastructure.
Wow, wouldn't that be?
It would. I mean, and they were state-run facilities that, here, and what makes South Florida different and Clearwater different and all that is that it's a lot of private pay. And at the time, I'm hoping it's not still like this, like you came to Florida on a gold card, essentially, of your insurance and just bounced from places.
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah.
That dangerousness of that doesn't allow anyone to actually get stability. It just feeds this kind of meat market of patient brokering. And so it's fascinating to me how, even though we have a plethora of facilities and sober homes here in Florida, we don't have actually what the stabilization piece that other states like Minnesota were able to keep those areas safe because of.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we could, like I said, we could go off on a tangent on that for a long time, you and I know we could. And, obviously that's where it's really important to have and know people who are informed. And that's where, someone like you or I, if you're a family member and you're watching this and you don't know who to turn to, I'm certainly a resource. I'm sure Will would be willing to be a resource, regardless of, there's no money in that. This is just, we want to help you get sober. Certainly if you see me as a therapist or if you go to sober living, you don't get to stay for free, right? But But, even if you just need resources, we're always here for that, for sure, because we need people like us to help people get sober. And that's the other piece of that support, is it's really, you can't do it by yourself. And a big part of addiction, like you said, your world was really small. So, you kind of cut out the people who might call you out on your stuff and end up alone and lonely. And the more you're alone and lonely, the more you feel like you're the only person who's going through what you're going through.
That's all true.
And I think that that's exactly where, 12-step program, smart recovery, refuge recovery treatment, longer term treatment like intensive outpatient, and continuing to have a therapist or somebody that you're willing to share and open up with, because for a lot of people, the first time they come see me as a therapist is the first time they're willing to open up at all. This is the first time they've even admitted that they have a problem, or that they want to make changes, because there's different levels, which again, I could go off on for a long time, but I want to get back to your story.
Well, I love the point that you're making, because I feel it's an important one. It's all about community. So I suffered from this weird delusion when I was actively using, that everyone was doing what I was doing, but nobody felt the way that I felt. And so then I get into the 12 steps or smart recovery or celebrate recovery or refuge recovery, and I find people who feel and think the way that I do. And they've found a way out of that misery. And at which point then they become the lifeblood that I need, along with good mental health and substance abuse counseling, to be able to make a change in my life. Because without them, I'll continue to end up chasing the women who aren't right for me. I'll continue to end up chasing people who may lead me back to a drink or a drug, or jobs or money, or any of these other things that just don't end up being the right thing for me or the people around me. So all of these type of behaviors that go along with being a person who suffers with a substance use disorder, turns out it has way more to do with the people than it does with the substances.
Imagine that.
Imagine that, like I like to joke around with people. I can't even really call myself a drug addict alcoholic, because I haven't had a problem with drugs and alcohol in years. You know what I suck at is sobriety. I need help with that. And by asking for help, I run into good teachers. By asking for help, I get more support. The biggest problem with my disease, and if you relate to this, our disease, is that it likes to convince us that we're better. It likes to convince us that we don't need help. And for as long as we're willing to hold on to our pride, we're only going to harm ourselves and very possibly harm others.
For sure.
So it's an amazing thing that you're doing.
Thank you.
Really, the fact that you're able to get people, myself included, to open up to you is an absolutely amazing gift that you have, Lori.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love, and that's why I was so excited to interview you, is you just have such a great way of sharing your story. And it's so much fun, because we can, have those conversations together. So I love that. So related to support, what was one or two of the best ways that someone in your life, family, friends, sponsor, extended family, whatever, supported you in your recovery, and what was one or two of the worst ways?
Okay. When I came back from my my brief relapse at 21, I had to tell my father to stop helping me. Now, he was an absolutely amazing guy who I love to death. He's also a classic enabler. He liked taking care of me, and he liked picking up after. Don't get me wrong, it frustrated the hell out of him. But he was that helicopter type of, okay, let's fix what the boy did now. So I had to tell him, hey man, for as long as you're going to pick up after me, I'm never going to get better. And so I found to be an uncommon thing. Generally, those of us who suffer with an addiction are never going to try to remove the safety net.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. That says a lot about where you were in your recovery. I'm sure you let it happen for a while though.
It just said that, yeah, it definitely didn't happen at first, and it really just said how sick and tired I was of being sick and tired with myself.
Mhm. Can
And we
you,
all get there.
for those who, may be family members who may be listening to this, can you talk about a few of the specific things that he did that, because we talk about enabling all the time, but a lot of times they're like, what does that even mean? How do I know that I'm enabling that person? So can you give me a couple examples?
Yeah, so I ended up homeless in my active use, and that was because I didn't pay my rent. And then I just kind of left out of town. And when I returned, I couch surfed until I got kicked out of my friends' houses, and eventually ended up breaking into his boat on Lake Anna in I don't remember what county that's in, but in Virginia. And he found me there because I believe the marina called him and was like, "Hey, somebody's sleeping on your boat." And he decided that he was going to fix this by giving me money. And so I immediately took that money and spent it on drugs. And because he assumed that I would take it and get an apartment with it. I did not. Um, just parents, if you're watching, don't give cash to an active addict alcoholic. It's never a good idea.
Never a good idea.
Yeah. And so then he went ahead, and after I'd blown the first $1,000, this was back in 2004, he just went and got me an apartment himself with the second 1,000, and hooked me up with a job that I didn't really do well at, but they tolerated me and they paid me. And that lasted about 3 months before I ended up in treatment.
So that's a little bit better because, obviously we want, as a therapist, the goal is to help the family, help you support your recovery, and that's not, there's not easy answers for that. Like, some people are not willing to let their kid be homeless, which, I can understand that. For some people, they are willing to do that because that's what they need. That's what you needed. But for some people, that could also mean death. So we have to be mindful of that there's no one right answer. But anything, at least how I always share it, is anything that's going to be supportive of recovery. So it was definitely better for dad to get you the apartment than to give you cash.
From a harm reduction point of view, you are absolutely correct. And that harm reduction point of view is incredibly important in this day and age. I used to joke when I lived in Minnesota, why couldn't they have something like this in Florida? Because I was required in a colder climate to go along with the culture and the process of the whole thing because I wanted to stay indoors. It was cold up there. And Florida, here's the thing, it's kind of warm year round. So there is an element of you being able to survive if you end up homeless in Florida. That being said, that's not necessarily the best thing for anyone.
Right.
We are not in a position to deprive people of services in an age where so many people are dying. So we don't want to deprive them, and at the same time, we don't want to put them in such a situation where they never feel it's necessary to change.
Right, absolutely. And that's really the enabling piece of it. So you have to find that balance. And that's where someone like you or I can be really helpful to help tease that out, not to try and do it on your own. So not giving you cash, that was definitely a way he enabled you. Can you think of any other big ones that you want to put out there? Because we'll be here for 2 hours if you and I just keep chatting. So keep us to, an hour, maybe?
I'm going to try. I'm going to, how we go, Lori. But just a brief summary of always kind of making excuses for the addict's behavior. That's always, always never really being able to abide by their own boundaries, saying, hey, this is the last time, or this is the only thing I'm going to do, and then going ahead and putting themselves in a situation where they're manipulated into giving the help that the addict wants. I did all of this to my father. I mean, and I'm incredibly grateful to him. And at the same time, I'm incredibly aware of how much I used him. And so if I can share anything, if you in any way feel like you're just being used, you should probably talk to Lori about what's going on, because you might think you're doing everything you can to save them, and they might just be, yeah, you're my parent, I expect this of you. And that's really dangerous for the addict and alcoholic if we're willing to co-sign that. If you baby that type of immature behavior, we'll eventually have to bury it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some things, both in your early recovery and long term as you've gone on, what are some of the ways that people have been supportive of you that was helpful?
Honestly, the most helpful thing I have ever heard from any person, and it's been multiple, is no. I know that sounds weird, but when someone like me gets told, hey man, it's not like that and it's okay, or hey man, no, we're not going to do things that way, I get an opportunity to kind of either grow up or throw a temper tantrum. And so I guess I can't fully explain how important that is and how great that process is, but when we as addicts and alcoholics get okay with hearing no and become okay with things not being the way that we think they're supposed to be, quote unquote, if you can relate to that, we begin to grow up and have a good life where we can accept the world around us. And that same being told no turns into, here's what I'd like to see instead. So that we can, so there's been hundreds of people who have been able to help me, from my very first good friend, Mickey up in St. Paul, Minnesota, to my current good friend, Dave, here in Clearwater. Like, I mean, like there are people that we surround ourselves with who know us, who know our behavior patterns and can help us become better versions of ourselves. So, Lori, you're an excellent, sounding board for, hey, is this a good idea or not? And it's the willingness to ask that. It's the, hey, I need help. Here's what I'm thinking, or here's what's going on. For as long as we're able to practice that, we're going to be okay. I mean, I don't know how else to, once we've been stabilized, for as long as an addict and alcoholic can say, hey man, I don't know what's going on anymore, I need help. Their life can get better continually.
Yeah, and I think it goes back again to, and I love how you summarize that, because it goes back again to, that's human behavior. Anytime we're willing and open to being vulnerable, to growing, we're gonna get better. The minute that we stay stuck in that rigidity that we think things have to be a certain way, and listen, we're all certainly guilty of that. I know I'm guilty of that, we get stuck in that things should be this certain way, then, we risk going off our path. And I always say, like I said, if you don't have a problem with drugs or alcohol, risking going off that path might just mean that you get in a fight with somebody, or, a relationship ends, or maybe you're not so happy. But, if you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, that could mean death for you.
It could. And so I like to say that having an addiction is being more human than human.
I like that.
So all of those instincts that are natural to all of us are dialed up to 10 on like an amp. And that means that when we play those particular tunes, it's really loud. And it's really obvious to the people around us, hey man, that wasn't cool. That wasn't right.
Yeah.
And we have a process, no matter the pathway, we have a process by which we can make that right with the people around us.
Absolutely.
And by making those mistakes right, not by not making them. Really want to make this clear. Addicts and alcoholics are never going to walk on water. They are never going to be saints. They are going to do stupid, silly things because they're still trying to grow up. As addicts and alcoholics, we have an immaturity issue where our emotional development has been stunted. So our reactions to everyday normal things might be not someone like Lori you might be like, hey man, you're being kind of immature. And we're like, well, I'll let you know when I'm done coloring in my blanket fort and we'll talk about it.
I was waiting for you to throw raspberries at me just then.
Yes. Yes. I did that, didn't I?
Yes, you certainly
Yes.
have. Yeah. So
Forgot about that. Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
was waiting for it. It's like when you get called out on your stuff, it's like, right? So,
Yep.
and we joke because we have to, because this is a serious situation, but at the same time, like, what an amazing amount of strength you have. And forgive me, I'm a therapist. I don't do math. That's always my thing. What is that? What is it? 15 years?
It'll be 15 years this February, God willing.
That's awesome. That's so amazing, and such a feat to be able to share that, with the world. I mean, it's incredible to have that long-term recovery that a lot of people don't get to see, they don't get to experience. And that's one of the things that I love about Recovery Month is it offers us the opportunity, not that we shouldn't be doing this all the time, because we sure should, and maybe I will, who knows, maybe I'll do this every month, but
I'd love to do this with you. I enjoy this.
Yeah, it's fun. We might have to talk about that. But, being able to share that it is possible, and that not only do people recover, but recover long term. Because it's we see, and even as a therapist in the trenches, I see a lot of people stay sober for 2 years, 4 years, whatever, and then they relapse, and then and understanding that can be a part of the process for a lot of people, especially when you have a lot of other traumas and co-occurring anxiety and depression and mood disorders and things like that, because that just adds on to the difficulties of not having the skills to cope with life, or or relationships, or different things like that, as well as the biology, which is a whole nother conversation. We've got all of those things that can sometimes work against us, but to just be able to see that it's possible to live sober for that long is awesome. And it takes such a level of strength, emotional and physical strength,
Well, we absolutely do recover. All right. It can seem disheartening when we're suffering with a loved one, not for a loved one, but with them. And it can seem like it's hopeless, especially if we've ever had to bury somebody that we care about.
Yeah, for sure.
What I'm hopeful for in the future is that everyone will get the same opportunity, and everyone will get the same level of support throughout the process, where someone who goes in for a checkup because they had cancer that they're in remission for, or has been successfully taking their insulin for a long period of time so their diabetes hasn't accelerated. I'm hopeful for a time where addictions are addressed the same way here in the States. And people like myself no longer need, 14 years shouldn't be the exception. And that's kind of it's that long-term support of the expectation, that no one should ever have this issue to begin with, because it's a moral issue, who obviously makes them stigmatized and bad if they have it. And B, if they have been stabilized, should never have a problem again in their life. Now, all of a sudden, they should have everything together as a regular person does, and be able to handle life, even though we suffer from this emotional challenge and an inability to cope with life in any type of mature way on a regular basis. So if you've ever spent any amount of time around an active addict alcoholic, or an addict and alcoholic in recovery, you may discover that we're somewhat immature and perverted people. We tend to make wrong jokes at the wrong times, just for laughs, and just because in our own mind we're this many. And so that ability to grow up begins with the idea of accepting, okay, I'm going to react to life a little bit off. And if I can accept that about myself, not every single thing I think or feel is accurate, and life is going to be okay the way that it is, it gets better. I mean, we do recover. It does get better. I can't.
That's awesome.
Say that enough.
I appreciate that. Well, I have a couple more questions for you, if that's okay.
Yes, I do have to go soon, though. I do apologize.
Okay, so let me think. So usually the first 6 months to a year is like the most difficult pieces. So if you have any thoughts, like what was the worst thing for you and what helped you, would be the first thing. I'm gonna try not to give you too many questions at one time. So we'll start with that.
Okay. What was most helpful to me initially was having the bottom raised by not being around my own area. Don't get me wrong. You go anywhere in the world, you take you with you. If you don't improve your behavior or change. That being said, getting outside of my home environment gave me the opportunity to get better. I don't think I could have heard the same message if I was surrounded by the old stomping grounds where I used to get high and drink. So that was the most important. The not so helpful part for me was, in retrospect, I don't know that there was a not so helpful part besides myself. I just had a lot of contempt prior to investigation. So I wasn't really willing to practice what people were telling me to do. And it was only through becoming fully just sick of myself that I was finally willing to follow some directions. So when I did come back from that slip in that first 66 months, a year, it really was just about following directions. I don't think it really meant anything. It was like completing homework, or you're at boot camp and you're like left, right, left. It's just I just did what people told me to do because I didn't want to feel the way that I was feeling. What's that?
That surrender piece, like not having to control everything.
That surrender is huge, and it's so not easy for addicts and alcoholics to do.
Yes.
And it's so weird because like my life sucked. I wanted to kill myself, and yet I have this weird sense of false pride of I'm going to make things work the way that I want them to work. It's a really weird perception on the world. So when I finally got to that point of I'm kind of full of shit, so I should just follow what other people tell me to do, my life got better. And that's such a tough thing to explain to someone who's suffering, because look at this guy and telling us that I need to surrender. I probably would have given the middle finger to me when I was an activist. So I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, the other thing is like, what would you say to somebody who's still struggling, or in that first, let's say 6 months to a year, or even beyond that, and feeling like life isn't exactly going the way they want to, or they're terrified of withdrawal, or that piece of having to deal with their crap, right, in that first 6 months, because that's usually the most up and down part. What would you say to that person?
There are a couple of things to do with that. So from the perspective of the professional world, we want to create essentially a softer landing. So the idea is working with the family and working with the individual for harm reduction techniques that are hopefully going to save this person's life and give them enough time to hear a message where they can reinvent themselves and have a good life. That takes a lot of moving parts. So sitting down, establishing firm boundaries, holding people to them, the addict as well as the family, all of these different processes, but then allowing people to fail. And I know that sounds horrible. Like, we don't accept failure as a society very well. But knowing that this is a illness that not only takes lives, but is incredibly difficult to overcome. So when you know that it's difficult for you to change, imagine how difficult it is to try and help somebody else change.
Right.
So like, I mean, as a therapist, Lori, like the work that you do in helping opening people's minds to what they aren't able to see themselves is so incredibly valuable, because we all get into this tunnel vision, not only the family, but the addict, of this is what I want, this is how I'm going to get it, and that's the end of the discussion. And we miss like 5 or 6 important parts. So what can I tell that person? You're going to make mistakes. It's going to be okay so long as you're still alive. And we just need to establish a process by which you can stay alive. So Narcan is huge these days. Having people around us who understand what's going on and aren't judging us is huge these days. Having a support plan for what happens if we do return to active use, that's huge. Having, I mean, there's so many, and having a support plan for what happens if we succeed. We talk about the negative side of things so much, and we forget that the ditch is on the other side. What if, like everything goes the way we want it to go? We get everything, then we freak out because we don't know how to handle that either.
Plenty of people relapse for that reason too. A big, amount of that is like, oh, I'm just like you did. Oh, I'm great. I'm cured. Or, oh my God, I'm actually successful. I have no idea what to do. I'm so used to being, failing and feeling like crap about myself. I don't know how to do well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what would you say? The last thing, because I'll keep asking because I have so many questions for you, and like I said, we'll probably have to do this again, but what would you say is one of the beacons of hope for people who aspire to long-term recovery, and what would you say is one of the things that has helped you more than anything else to have that long-term recovery? You froze. I don't know if you can still hear me. Oh man, we might be out of luck here. We'll wait another minute and see if he comes back. Hopefully it's not me. Hey, you're moving again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost internet connection there for a second. Could you please ask that question again? I'm very sorry.
That's okay. So it was a two-part question.
Okay.
What can you use as a beacon of hope for people who aspire to having long-term recovery, whether they're still in active addiction or whether they have some time of
sobriety? Can I answer that first?
Yes.
Anything that you want to do and think you're capable of doing, you are. Active sobriety, active recovery means getting the opportunity to follow your dreams. All right. So it's being able to go anywhere as a free person and do the things that you want to do. And it turns out recovery is everything that I was looking for in drugs and alcohol. So it's a dual type of thing. It doesn't seem like it would be, but
wow.
Truly,
can you say that again? Because that was like, drop the mic, mind blown. What?
All I was looking for in drugs and alcohol was to be okay with me. I found that through a pathway in recovery. You can have that too. And because of that, being okay with myself, I have an opportunity to pursue my dreams, contribute to the world around me, and really enjoy my life more than just now I'm finally at peace. Even though if only thing I ever got was to be at peace, which is all I ever wanted from drugs and alcohol, that would be enough. What was the second question?
You just gave me goosebumps. I think we need to end at that because I don't know that there's a better question than I can ask.
Well, I hope, I know that it's possible. Like I've seen the light turn on with people. I know hosts of individuals just like myself who have stayed sober long term. This is not like I'm really not that special. So I know that Lori, having worked in the stabilization side of things, seeing people this long sober isn't as often, but it really does happen more often than people
years,
think.
But but sometimes we do maintenance, right? That checkup that you were talking about.
And I need that. And thank you. Nope.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love to, I'll put your information in the chat after the thing because I'm not super tech savvy, so we'll figure that part out. But if you want to share how people can reach out to you with associate recovery communities or anything else that you want to share, you can do that before we send off because I know you have to go.
Yeah, I appreciate. Thank you for the time though, talking with you, and I hope we get to catch up a little bit later. We have the sober living facility out here in Clearwater and in Pasco and in Hillsborough, over 100 FAR accredited beds. And if you know someone who is suffering with an addiction, who needs some further support after being stabilized, we're looking forward to helping them. So go to www.arc12.org and thank you listening to me, I guess. And thank you, Lori, for inviting me on. It's a privilege to get to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it so much. And of course, I've referred and been to Will's sober houses, so I think they're absolutely wonderful. I've referred to them for years, and certainly if you have any questions for me, I'm here. My information will be in the chat as well. And even if you don't think you need help or you don't know that you need help, feel free to reach out. My first session, my consultation is always complimentary. So feel free to reach out, give me a call, shoot me a message, and I'd love to support you. We can and do recover, right, Will?
We can and do recover. Yes, ma'am, Lori.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.